Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker, and today is the 30th day of November 2025, and this is the first Sunday of Advent, so that's what's going on. I have a quote that takes two verses from the first chapter of Matthew, this is what Matthew 1:1 says, "An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." And then Matthew goes into his genealogy of who begat whom. And so he gets all done, and he says at verse 17 of the first chapter of Matthew, he says, "So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. How about that? My wife Elaine does a lot of genealogical research on Ancestry.com. She recently told me that she's discovered another king in her ancestry. This makes 3 kings, 2 French and 1 English. I, on the other hand, am related to a long line of Dutch smugglers and a pig farmer in the area of Brussels. Genealogy is one of those things that none of us is going to be able to do much to change. It is what it is. We're stuck with the smugglers and the pig farmers who have come before us. We begin the Advent season today. Only 2 of the 4 Gospels that made it into the New Testament canon bothered to mention the birth of Jesus. Mark and John start essentially with Jesus' baptism at the Jordan River by John, and then they tell us of Jesus' ministry and Jesus' teachings, and then they join all 4 Gospels together with the Passion narrative. That is the story of Jesus' arrest, crucifixion, and resurrection. But Mark and John figure that the birth of Jesus is not an important event. But Matthew and Luke start even before Jesus' birth. They start with, in Matthew's case, the birth of John the Baptist. Both believe that there's significance in Jesus' birth and that the gospel reader should know. I used a trick with my high school, church school class many years ago by asking true and false questions like this. The shepherds met the wise men at the manger in which the baby Jesus lay. True or false? And that's false. And I could generally trick my high schoolers into giving me the wrong answer, and then I'd get to explain. Matthew has the story of the wise men who come from the east to Jerusalem and inquire about the child whose birth is foretold by the star. Then they go on following the star, and they come, according to Matthew, to the house in which the child was with Mary, his mother. No angels, no shepherds, no manger. If you want those, you have to go to Luke. In Luke, we have the shepherds minding their own business in the fields when there's an outbreak of heavenly appearances, first 1 angel and then a multitude of angels. Then the shepherds go to find the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes lying in a manger. Both Matthew and Luke have a genealogy for Jesus. Now, we generally ignore these genealogies because they're boring. This man begat that son, who begat, and who begat, and who begat. We can't pronounce the names, and even if we could, the names mean very little to us. Matthew's genealogy and Luke's are different. Matthew starts with Abraham, and he works through the generations to Jesus. Luke, on the other hand, begins with Jesus' birth and traces back through the generations to Adam. Now that's a genealogy. It's hard to make more of a genealogy with more depth than that. I think Luke must have had a subscription to Ancestry.com. That's really quite impressive to take it all the way back to Adam. Matthew and Luke both clearly believe Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary, yet both trace Jesus' ancestry through Joseph, showing that Jesus is a descendant of David and of Abraham. There's been a lot of study and a lot of guesswork done on these two genealogies, trying to figure out who's who and in what order the ancestors could be arranged or rearranged, and why it's important. My guess is that the genealogies were intended to be more symbolic than literal. First, both genealogies tie Jesus to King David and to Abraham. So the Messiah was expected to come from David's line. That was part of the definition of Messiah. The Messiah also had to be related to Father Abraham. That was a measure of your Jewishness. The Messiah had to come from the core of Jewish history and tradition. The Matthew genealogy shows more evidence of being a symbolic genealogy. As we heard at the beginning of this presentation, Matthew begins, or in the first chapter, he says, all of the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. So Matthew's genealogy has 14 generations between Abraham and David, 14 between David and the exile to Babylon, and 13, well, it's close to 14, but 13 between the return from exile and the birth of Jesus. Biblical scholars say it's a nice, neat pattern, but it probably didn't represent the number of actual generations necessary to get from Abraham to David, or from David to the exile, or from the exile to Jesus' birth. So why did he come up with 14? Well, we have to know our Hebrew in order to understand. There are no numbers in the Hebrew alphabet. There are also no vowels in Hebrew, only consonants. Letters stood in for numbers. When someone was writing something and it had to say there were 76 trombones, you had to use letters to stand for numbers. Certain numbers spelled out important words. For example, there were 72 generations in Luke's account. The number 72 was supposed to have special lucky characteristics because of what the letters that stood in for the numbers implied. Unless you know Hebrew, or unless you read the footnotes in your study Bible really carefully, you're going to miss the significance of 14 that calls out from the genealogy over and over again. In the Hebrew alphabet, the number 14 was written DVD. Since there were no vowels in the written language, the name David was also written as DVD. It would have been obvious to Jews and invisible to non-Hebrew speakers that the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, had David written all over it. Matthew wrote his gospel for the Jews to show how Jesus, the Messiah, fit into all of the Old Testament prophecies. And over, Matthew says to his reader, this was done to fulfill what was written by the prophet. And then he would quote the Old Testament prophetic writings. Matthew does something else in his genealogy that would cause Jewish readers to sit up and take notice, but it goes right past us, we don't notice. But it would be like Matthew reciting a limerick and intentionally blowing the last line. Let's imagine a limerick that we all know. There once was a man from Peru who dreamt he was eating his shoe. He awoke in the night in a terrible fright and found he was just chewing on his pillow. What? Now we find that odd because we've been trained to know what a limerick should sound like. First of all, it should have a certain rhyming pattern. A, and then B, and then A again. And it has a certain rhythm to it as well. Jewish readers would know that a genealogy should include only men. No women included in a standard garden variety Jewish genealogy. So it's 4 women included in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus. And it's not the greatest women in Israel's history that he includes. They're not heroes. He includes Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. Not only does Matthew include 4 women in his genealogy of the Messiah, but his Jewish readers also know that he must be making some point by including them. If we know our Jewish history, these 4 women are a pretty unusual bunch. 2 aren't even Jewish. One's Canaanite and the other is a Moabite. But they're included in the pedigree of the Messiah. Each woman acted independently and in some cases scandalously at critical junctures of Israel's history to ensure the continuation of the Davidic line. These 4 independent, sort of scandalous women are sprinkled into the family tree of the Messiah. What does it mean to include these women? His Jewish readers, Matthew's Jewish readers, would understand something about the Messiah even before they read about his birth, let alone read his teachings or read about his death or his resurrection. And essentially, Matthew is telling his Jewish readers, get ready to have things shaken up. This Messiah will have big flaws in his pedigree. He's not necessarily going to meet traditional expectations. This Messiah is going to break conventional rules. Be ready for a Messiah who's not afraid of scandal. This Messiah is going to break open the patriarchal system that excludes women. Whoa. As we begin the season of Advent, we need to be reminded that the arrival of this new Messiah may shake things up for us. This perfect little baby Jesus arrives in this world with a flawed pedigree, just like the rest of us. This Messiah is going to challenge some of our rules about how we've always done it this way. Are we ready to rethink what is scandalous? Are we ready to be open to the unexpected? The questions begin even before the stories of the birth of the Christ child. Are we ready? Welcome to Advent. Well, thank you very much for your time to listen to this. I appreciate it very much. And if you find value in it, I hope you'll feel free to pass it along. Take care of yourself. See you soon. God bless.